Right then, if you're watching these videos in the order they're uploaded, then you'll have noticed that the one directly before this one tackled some supremely heavy stuff. So, to keep things balanced, today we'll be having a nice, fun, easygoing romp of a countdown where somehow I have to talk over good music in order to explain why said music is good. I really didn't think this through, apparently. Yo there, you lovely people. I am Tessellating Hexagons, and honestly, you really would have thought that I'd have made this video a lot sooner, because, I mean, my two great passions in life are Eurovision and video games, even if the viewing figures don't exactly encourage me to keep making videos about the latter, but that's not going to stop me anytime soon. So it only seems natural that sooner or later I'd make some sort of video that combines my talents of the two at whatever level that I can. For the time being, that just means taking what I know about musical analysis and instead applying it to video game soundtracks, or more accurately, BGM, which, so I was raised to believe, stands for background music. Sound design in video games is one of those things that you tend not to notice when it's done right, and that you really notice when it's done wrong, so I think it's worth taking a step back and acknowledging those occasions where it's not only done right, it's done so right that it stands head and shoulders above its nearest competition, or at least to enough of an extent that the tracks in question came readily to mind when I was making this list anyway. Regardless, good music can make or break the quality of a game and the experience of playing it, and so I want to talk about 10 of my favourite pieces from my own personal gaming history. Maybe this isn't a tried and true top 10 so much as I picked 10 tracks and then just ranked those, but just bear in mind, there are so many pieces of great music out there that there's no way I could consider them all, much less have heard them all, so that's kind of my get out clause if you happen to disagree with my list. Art is subjective after all. And on that note, let's wheel in the rules for this list. First off, the music in question has to be from games that I have played personally. If nothing else, I can't rank a track that I've never heard, and if I haven't heard it in context, I would say that constitutes missing out on a big part of the overall experience. Secondly, that same caveat that comes up in every top 10 countdown on YouTube, one representative per game franchise. On that I shall not budge. Typically speaking, game series tend to have a relatively uniform-ish musical style, composed by the same people each time, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's a mark of consistency. But I want some diversity in this list. I don't want 10 songs that all sound, not necessarily the same, but like they all came from the same person. And finally, no main themes and no credits themes, so basically no overtures. This is the main reason why I struggled to come up with a concise title for this video, which may be down there if you're watching on YouTube, or up there on Patreon, or some other direction if you're watching this on a website where it's been illegally uploaded without my consent. I don't know how the internet works. The point is, I can't very well call this top 10 level musics, because, well, musics isn't really a word in that sense, and also not every game works in terms of levels anyway, even though that is the gist of what I'm talking about here. The focus for this list is music that plays during gameplay, basically. If nothing else, I believe that those pieces are written with a different mindset from overtures and closing themes, opening, closing credits, whatever. I feel as though they're written differently. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And so, well, let's start the countdown. Number 10. At this point in history, the general consensus in the online world is that the Paper Mario franchise used to be an excellent, amazing, wonderful side series, and it turned into hot garbage at some point around the halfway mark. It's gone from a pristine sheet of perfect, crisp A4 to a square of single-ply, freshly upon toilet paper that's just been up someone's arse. But one thing that I will dispute within that is the exact point in the side series when that transition occurred. Say what you will about Super Paper Mario, but while it may have been a departure from the standard Paper Mario format, it was still a damn good game with a weirdly heavy story, good but different gameplay, and, crucially, a surprisingly good soundtrack. And nowhere are all three of those points more prevalent than in Chapter 6, Samus Kingdom. At this point in the game's story, we're painfully aware of this giant hole in the sky that's been consuming worlds, or so we've been told, and when we arrive in Samus Kingdom, we're greeted by a gorgeous feudal Japanese aesthetic in front of a sky that is mostly a giant swirling void of death and despair. And for the precious few minutes that we spend here before the gameplay takes a turn in favour of a butt-ton of combat, we get this delightfully quirky piece with obvious Japanese influences but still distinctly in the game's signature style. That track really resonated with me when I first played the game because I had such high expectations for Chapter 6, if only because the local aesthetic was absolutely gorgeous and the music set such a precedent. So the actual basis of the world, whether you factor in the game's plot into it or not, was a bit of a letdown, to say the least, but still. The jarring juxtaposition between this fun, wonky tune and the literal expanse of nothingness the world becomes means that, in hindsight, the frivolity of the initial music suddenly seems especially tragic. This world had such promise, and now it and its fun, bouncy theme have been erased from reality. Whoa. Number 9. Speaking of music that had an immediate impact upon first listening, let's hop over to the 5th generation of Pokemon games for a hot second there. Black or white, originals or sequels, it doesn't matter. All 4 iterations of the Unova region, or, well, I always pronounced it Unova as in it's yet another region, feature the utter earworm that is Driftvale City. When I first reached the place on my first trip across the region, I didn't actually realise it was a town in its own right for entirely too long. I just thought that whichever route the suspension bridge spat you out onto had some dope-ass music. Now, I can only wonder how I missed the marquee thing at the top of the screen, clearly saying Driftvale City. I may have been entirely too enraptured by the statue of the billowing sail at the city's entrance. Funnily enough, the perfect roundature of that statue is the first thing that comes to mind whenever I hear the opening bars of this track. It's just that iconic. And, by the way, I will admit it was a tough call picking this track from the soundtrack of the games, especially when the black version of Opelucid City exists. Once again, I will fight the entire internet. Black Opelucid City is the vastly superior version, even if Black City proper is massively garbage compared to White Forest, but that's a story for another time. Regardless, Driftrail's music is better than any of those things anyway, so the whole thing is an argument I'll shelve for another day. Driftrail is the greatest city in Unova, and that's all I have to say on the matter. Moving on. Number 8. Now, I'd be remiss to go through a list of the greatest tracks from gaming soundtracks in my personal history and not take a moment to recognise the work of the legendary Grant Kirkhope, one of the most prolific composers of, well, basically the past 20 years if not more, and one who is still celebrated to this very day. He still works, he's still brilliant, like, wow, not every composer can lay claim to that. And keeping up this little theme that I've established, I've chosen for this list another piece that was love at first listen for me, or more so than its peers throughout the Banjo-Kazooie soundtrack anyway, because that's a very good soundtrack on the whole. Say what you will about Rusty Bucket Bay, but I'll still happily leap to its defense. As a level, casual players hate it for its spike in difficulty, and speedrunners only really tolerate it, just because of the whole sequence with the engine room. My judgment of it, meanwhile, was immediately rose-tinted just from the moment I heard those juicy, brassy opening notes, and the ship whistles interjecting every now and then were just the icing on the cake, especially the one that occurs at around the loop point of the song, the one that appears as whistle number 1 in the Match the Whistles minigame at the front of the eponymous ship. So, as someone who was always a fan of the Ocean Zone in the cult classic British game show The Crystal Maze, for the 2 series in which it appeared in place of the Industrial Zone, Rusty Bucket Bay was never not going to have something of an advantage here, but it is absolutely the music that helped seal the deal there. And if that's not an absolute win for a composer, I really don't know what more you could ask for. That said, they had to remove the Ocean Zone from the Crystal Maze due to health and safety regulations, and in all fairness, Rusty Bucket Bay does do a good job in showcasing exactly why that was justified. Haha. Number 7. At this point in the countdown, you might very well be thinking, Tess, do you realize that everything you've listed so far has all come from Nintendo games? Because, like, you have. And the more astute of you might also add, weren't you a Sega child anyway? What's the deal with all the Nintendo? And to those questions, I say yes, and yes, in that order. So let's take a moment to think about the Sonic franchise. No, stop thinking, don't think too hard about it or you will literally implode. Good Sonic games do exist. Again, internet, fight me. And Sonic Adventures 1 and 2 both count as good games. Again, I will fight the entire internet. Expect dedicated Patreon videos about those two games at some point, maybe very soon, but for now, we'll just settle for the soundtrack. Specifically, in Sonic Adventure 2, a track entitled Lovely Gate 3, the theme of the level Headquarters. Sonic games, despite their egregiously varied quality over the years, have always had standout music to score them, and Sonic Adventure 2 is no exception. In fact, Adventure 2, much like its immediate predecessor, had a heavy focus on characters, and the soundtrack did an excellent job reflecting that. Sonic's levels had energetic, rocky pieces, Knuckles' had assorted types of R&B influences, Shadow's were as brooding and intense as the man himself, and Rouge's stages always had what I'd like to call a touch of the sexy. Now, make no mistake, as a child, I absolutely hated Headquarters as a level. The gimmick here is that you need to explore a closed circuit of 4 rooms looking for 3 keys. Standard fare for an SA2 treasure hunt level, and I love that, that's fine. But the whole place is under constant patrol by these invincible drone things that will launch an unavoidable laser attack whilst screaming at you with alarms that mess with the lighting in the entire room. And as a sufferer of social anxiety, that's actual hell. No exaggeration. So the music always came to me as a kind of consolation prize. Like, hey, I may be on the run from one of the most terrifying enemies of my childhood, but damn, that brass section though. Number 6. Now, let's veer off in yet another completely unexpected direction. So far, this list has had 2 platformers, 1 RPG, and 1 unholy abomination that combines the 2. Well, let's forget about those for the moment, and head to the obvious zenith of great video game music, the humble genre of the rhythm game. And where better to look for the pinnacle of rhythm game music than the grand finale of the best and boldest of the Rhythm Paradise series, or Rhythm Heaven if you're American, or Rhythm Tengoku if you're Japanese and or a series purist. The Japanese title of the 4th Rhythm Paradise game is Rhythm Tengoku The Best Plus, which weirdly encapsulates the point of the game even better, albeit less punnily, than the English titles of Rhythm Paradise or Heaven Megamix. This 3DS entry in the series compiles updated remakes of rhythm games from the previous 3 titles, including the Japan-exclusive first game in the series, hence The Best, as well as adding in 1 entirely original new minigame for every 3 throwbacks, so The Best Plus. And you'd be surprised how long it took me to notice that pattern. Traditionally, the last stage in any Rhythm Paradise game is a so-called remix that takes bits and pieces from all the previous games and stitches them all together. The final remix of Megamix takes that 1 step further, and not only pulls in as many games from across the franchise's history as possible, though not every single one sadly, but still, but it also works in the theme tune of each individual title, including Megamix itself, into the music that you're playing to, as you play rhythm minigames that originated in that title. So for instance, it'll play the theme tune of the first game, and there will be minigames introduced in the first game at the time, and that's so clever! They worked it into the music, and they worked the gameplay into the music as well. It's genius! It's madness, it's astounding, and it is beautifully executed, and in keeping with Japanese customs, it absolutely defies any and all explanation. And how can you not love that? Number 5. And now for something completely different. Again. If you know me personally, then you'll know how much I love this track in particular, and even if you don't, you'll probably at least be familiar with how ready I am to defend Another Code R on the Wii, to so much of an extent that I Let's Played it and did a dedicated Patreon video on it about 2 months ago. But while the whole game has an excellent atmospheric soundtrack, there is a single piece in there that's always stood substantially above the rest in my experience, so much so that musically it stuck with me for many years after my first playthrough, even after I forgot almost everything else about the game. Once again, love at first listen. I'm talking here about Charlotte Graham's theme, referred to on the soundtrack as Unsullied Truth. While Mrs. Graham herself isn't my favourite character just because of her stereotypical old lady prejudices, her theme, which is only ever used in her presence, does feel as though it carries the weight of her years of experience, of wisdom, and of heartache. It's a piece that says, this person knows what they're talking about. This person has lived through some stuff you could never understand. This person has felt feelings you can't put into words. And to convey all of that just through a piece of music is one hell of an achievement, especially for composers on a game that got such mediocre public reception off the back of a less than AAA budget. Consider this yet another string to my "another code R is criminally underrated and I will defend it until my dying breath" bow. I'm not sure what kind of arrows I'd be shooting with that bow, but there you go. It's a great game, it's got a great soundtrack, and it was shot down by the needless, selfish curse that is region locking. How's that for unsullied truth? Number 4. Right. We all knew it was coming, it was just a question of when. It's a top 10 according to Tess. Clone Wars gotta be in there somewhere. But what's it gonna be? Moonlight Museum? Joyland? Mirage? Well, they were all up in contention for this spot on the list, which should stand as testament to the sheer quality that the amazing Kaneko Kakino is able to consistently put out as a composer, but actually, my favourite Clone Wars track doesn't come from my favourite game of all time. No indeed, we need to step back by a few years to the gloriously steampunky Temple of the Sun and its theme, Red Heat Coronia. In all truth, Daughter Phantomile is as full of quality tracks as its sequel, but Red Heat Coronia, the music that plays in Vision 5-1, has always been my number one favourite of the whole franchise. While it does bring the Eastern influences in the instrumentation department, as is par for the course in any Fire-themed level, or so it seems, the track remains so thoroughly original, as original, in fact, as the level it represents. It's a labyrinth of steam-powered bronze machinery, processing lava and protecting 4 orbs that serve as the keys to the temple's inner sanctum, and, partly thanks to the music, the fairly lengthy level that is has never felt like a chore. I believe I also observed, back when I was Let's Playing the game's Wii-based remake, that it's the ideal song to bust an impromptu nene to. I refuse to put my money where my mouth is in that department, but on a more serious note, this is a piece of music I could happily listen to on repeat for ages at a time, and not every track on this list, let alone any track ever, can lay claim to that privilege. Number 3. Oh boy. Oh boy. So, how many of y'all remember Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg? Because that's another game that I'm willing to die defending, to be quite honest. I just haven't got around to Let's Playing it yet. But, to be fair, it's hard in more than a few places, and, as if to specifically slap me in the face, the hardest mission in the game also has far and away the best music. Weirdly, this is from another level 5-1. I'm talking about Odd March, the theme of Circus Park at night. For the uninitiated, the way Billy Hatcher works is, all but the first mission of each level takes place during the day, but when you first arrive in a new area, you have to find and hatch a golden egg containing the local chicken elder at night in order to summon the morning. And if that egg is lost or destroyed, you die on the spot. And let's just say the enemies, and geography of Circus Park, isn't shy about making omelettes. But with music as wonderfully off-piste as this, I can't reasonably stay angry at the place. It has all the air and atmosphere of a somewhat wonky circus at night, working in motifs of coulrophobia and nyctophobia, the fears of clowns and darkness respectively. Now, I've never experienced either personally, but I can at least appreciate that the composition calls both to mind as concepts, especially with its almost oppressive amounts of constant, driving, upbeat energy, despite how imposing its key, not to mention its off-key melodies, happen to sound. In short, it feels like it's trying to overwhelm you with a sense of, we're having a good time, even if you aren't. And that's a damn fine representation of the level as a whole. It also makes the various daytime themes of Circus Park, which share the same leitmotif, but are generally lighter and happier, that much easier to appreciate as compositions. Number 2. And now, allow me to go full, total, absolute, basic Tess for a moment. If you've seen any number of these Patreon videos of mine, you might notice a common theme amongst them. You could probably count on one hand the number of videos that don't feature music by Masafumi Takada, if there are any at all, which I don't think there are offhand. sorry not sorry, the soundtracks of the 3 main Danganronpa games are just that exceptional. So picking just one for this list would be a rather tricky task, especially given that there are more than a handful of songs that recur throughout the series, reinvented for each game. But then again, when opinions are split just so perfectly, well, that just gives Monokuma all the more opportunity to showcase the Ultimate Academy's more phenomenal trial grounds. At the time of recording, I haven't done any research about Danganronpa V3 because I'm 4 chapters deep into playing it myself and I don't want to be spoiled. Say, didn't I do a gaming top 10 the last time I was in limbo between chapters 4 and 5 of a Danganronpa game? Anyway, as far as I've overheard, V3 is something of a controversial entry in the series, but I've yet to encounter anything that explains why that is. Just gonna interject here and say that at the time of recording this voiceover, I have played chapter 5, and okay, maybe I understand the controversy, but still, I don't think it's justified, but it's whatever. The debate scrum, or scrum debate, can't be the problem though. It's a new type of minigame that makes its debut in the first chapter of V3, pitting the class against each other in a team-based one-on-one argument shootout set to the absolute bangingest tune I've ever heard. It captures the desperation of having to argue in the faces of your friends, and knowing that, with just a little extra push, you might get through to them yet. And even taking away the music's thematic relevance to the game in question, and its futuristic instrumentation in keeping with the game's aesthetic, especially compared to its 2 direct predecessors, this is just a downright brilliant track. It'd sound right at home in a nightclub or something. But, come to think of it, I wouldn't advise actually playing it in a nightclub. I'm having visions already of an entire dance floor split down the middle, with merrymakers shouting random statements back and forth, trying to identify the blackened who spilled their pint. And number 1. But where do we go from there? I mean, I literally just invented the word bangingest to describe just how tune I found that last track to be. Well, as they say, the only way is up. You know that expression about landing amongst the stars? Well, in this instance, if you're shooting for the moon, I'd say it's a bit late to be worrying about missing. Good grief, the theme of the final hours from Majora's Mask is just anxiety personified. It's the ultimate culmination of all the raging emotions that the world of Termina evokes, especially the notion that any instance of hope that you can bring to the local population's lives in those fateful 3 in-game days will all be crushed under the weight of the moon at the end. And, if you want to turn the anxiety up to 11, listen to a version of the song that keeps the sound effect of the Termina clock tower bell in. That bell has such an iconic, distinctive and unique sound that you'll only ever have associated it with bad memories within the game thus far, constantly reminding you that time is running out. Pair that with a song that's surprisingly minimalist, with dreamlike synth in an ethereal, stifling key, and you get that feeling of panicked dread, the likes of which you usually only ever experience in a vicious dream, where your mind tells you that you should be very afraid, and you don't understand any part of what's going on or why, but you find yourself going along with it anyway. Majora's Mask is a brutally creepy game on the whole, and Koji Kondo is an amazing composer. Put the latter to work on the former, and the end result was never not going to be an utterly incredible soundtrack, building up to those final moments before the story's climax goes into overdrive. That final crunch time where, if you aren't prepared enough, then your only option is to either bail or stay and accept your punishment, being crushed by the moon, and how's about that for a terrible fate? And here endeth the list. I shall say, as all the Countdown YouTubers do, that I welcome your feedback in the comments below, because, well, I mean, I cared enough to put together a list video and share it online, so I actually would be interested in hearing what other people's top pieces of music are, including you. You know, whichever year, whichever video game, whatever your experiences are, genuinely curious over here. Of course, this is a heavily opinion-based topic, so you'll almost definitely have a completely different list from mine, and I would be happy to receive some music recommendations, so go right ahead. No, really. In the meantime, I just need to thank the lovely people on patreon.com/TessHex, who powered this video into existence as always. You can join them for as little as $1 per video, and for your trouble, I'll provide you with some tasty little perks, such as the ability to view these videos a month before they go public, as well as getting some extra exclusive bonus content that you won't find anywhere else. For June, that takes the form of a bonus video where I tell the story of how someone once stole one of my original characters and commissioned lewd art of them. It's a real trip, I assure you. That aside, it also means that you get access to 2 new Patreon videos the literal second you sign up. I recommend it, but it's not required, of course. Your generosity, your call. Anyway, as always, I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and I shall see you when next you choose to view me, and I certainly hope that's sometime very soon indeed. Until then...